from the fridge. Gonna grab myself a big old juicy steak for dinner tonight. Really in the mood for a ribeye. Hot weather outside, so I got myself this rib roast here for two. Ribeye, probably one of my favorite cuts of meat aside from New York strip. But this one here, we got it in a big size one at Christmas time, and just portioned it down and made steaks out of it. So you want to get it out of the bag, even with the ones that you get at the grocery store, and you want to let it dry out. So I'm going to do a process what's called dry brining, which is not adding any more liquid, but really just adding salt to it to dry out some of that moisture and to dry out the surface. So first thing you want to do is you want to start getting that moisture on the surface off, and I just do that with cheap old paper towel. You want to get all those juices off and really kind of give yourself something where the steak's gonna start working on everything inside, not just all that moisture on the outside. So just tap it off, discard that paper, and then you're going to want to flip it over and work on the other side. Again, you can see just how much wetness this is. This is the same thing as when you buy a steak in the grocery store. You don't want to just get it off and start seasoning it. That's not juices, that's just blood that's sitting there. So I want to weigh this steak out and just see how much it weighs, and that's going to kind of give you my time. So at 700 grams, that's about 1.5 pounds. So that's a big steak. So this is a 24-ounce ribeye there. And now at this point, you have it, you kind of look what it's like. You're going to want to start the dry brining process. So for me, for dry brining, what I normally do is I just heavily season both sides of the meat. You're going to want to really coat it. It's going to look like it's going to be a lot of steak, but because it's so thick, you're not going to really be able to add seasoning on the inside. So, but keep one hand clean, one hand to season. Your left hand is going to flip, your right hand is going to season, and that way you're not introducing any contaminants or blood into your seasoning jar. But again, on the second side, just make sure you coat it quite well. That's going to all be gone, and then what you're going to notice is when you come back, it's going to be a lot drier, it's going to be a lot darker, and it's going to be penetrated throughout the meat. So this is what it looks like after 3 or 4 hours. It's a lot darker. It's definitely a lot kind of not squishier, but you'll be able to see that it's loosened up a lot. That's pulled out a lot of the moisture, but it's also put a lot of that salt on the inside. So at this point, we're gonna crack some peppercorns because we're gonna get ready for seasoning. So I always use a mortar and pestle. I also have a pepper grinder, but I like a mortar and pestle because you can control the size. But usually mortar and pestles, a lot of people don't see, they come with 2 sides. So I'm using what's the crusher side, and then I'm going to use the rolling side. So if you just try using the rolling side, you'll notice that a lot of the peppercorns kind of just pop out all over the place. But you crush that peppercorn down to a point where you want it to be. Then you use the rolling side, you push it down, and then you can kind of roll it around the bowl, and you'll notice that it goes down. It's a lot easier to control. We love pepper. Pepper is probably one of my favorite seasonings, aside from, I guess, acid. But you put it in, you're going to want to coat this quite liberally, and on both sides. Again, when you think about it, the coarser it is, the less likely it is probably to cling, but also the less likely it is to just completely burn and scorch. If you just put like really fine grind powder on there, it's going to end up burning for sure. A lot of people will just think salt and pepper as your basic seasoning, but pepper does burn very easily, and it's got this very bitter taste to it. So once you get it covered, you're going to want to get it ready for the grill. Again, just kind of get all that seasoning in there and prepare your grill. So I'm going to go outside, get my grill prepared for the steak, turn it on. I always like to turn it on with the lid open. You should never turn it on with it closed. At this point, you can see that it's really low. What you're going to want to do is you're going to want to get it up to about 450 to be able to cook properly. Even though you notice the needle go up, don't think too much about cooking it right away. What you want is you want to make sure that the grates and the grills have enough time to actually absorb that heat. A lot of times the thermometer only registers the internal temperature of the grill or the oven, and what you really want to do is you want to get those grates hot, because that's what's going to sear it. You don't want to add any oil to the meat. I've seen people before put oil on the outside, and that's just going to cause flare up and it's going to taste like burnt oil. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that your grates are really clean. They're really hot, like I said, at that 450 mark, and then you're going to want to slap it on. And you're going to want to hear that kind of sizzle when you get down on it. If you don't, I wouldn't start the cooking process. I'd just take it back off and wait for it to heat up longer. So you can obviously hear that it's got that good sizzle. It's going to sit on there for roughly, I would say probably about 12 to 13 minutes of cooking. And you might think that that's a long time, but it's really going to be all about the touch of the meat. You can feel how loose it is right now, and as the meat cooks, it's going to get more firm. It's going to tighten up. Everything's going to tighten up in it, and it's going to start kind of feeling more leathery and like a baseball. So when you start touching the steak, if it starts feeling firm and bouncy, it's obviously cooking on the inside. When you're searing any kind of meat, you do not want to just be flip-flopping it around unless you have it in a cast iron. But on a grill like this, you're going to want to put it on there. You're going to want to leave it for a good amount of time. You're also going to want to probably at some point close the lid, because it's such a big piece of meat that if you're just searing it, you're going to have a really hard time getting the internal temperature to where you want it to be, which is that kind of like, for me, that mid-rare close to medium, but mostly mid-rare side. So I'm not going to be using a thermometer for this, but we'll come back. So at this point now, it's been sitting there for probably about 4 minutes, and I'm looking at it. It's ready to flip. I don't want to keep it on that side any longer, but close the lid. Come back to it again, 4 minutes later. Look at the bottom of it. If it looks good, flip it. If it doesn't, then keep it where it is. But this one obviously looks good. So you can kind of see where it starts breaking apart there, that if you open it up, you can still see how red it is in the middle. But we'll just close that lid again, and we'll get it ready for the next one. So again, it's been about another 4 minutes, so we're at about the 12-minute mark now, and this steak's looking pretty good. Some flare up is just happening a little bit there, so I'm going to pull it to the front, but you can see how much caramelization is happening. So I'm just going to give it a little feel. Ow, ow, ow. So just close that up again and just cook it the rest of the way. At this point, it looks really good. I think it's just about done. The sides of it haven't touched the grill at all, so what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to cook off those sides. There's a lot of fat on the side of it. You just want to kind of touch that or kiss that on the grill and just make sure that you get that from being that kind of rubbery raw taste. Do both sides or do all sides if you can. Just give it a touch on there. And then you can see on the left here I've got butter and tin foil. So you're going to take it off. You're going to want to rest this size of meat for probably about 15 minutes. So I'm putting it under tin foil, and I'm going to coat it with a little piece of butter. The butter you can just kind of put on top of it, but you're going to notice with the tin foil, there's really two sides to the tin foil. There's the shiny side, which I have there, and there's the matte side. So the shiny side is what kind of reflects the heat and keeps it, and then the matte side is really the non-stick side of the tin foil. Come back 15 minutes later, and you can see that there's a little bit of juices that have come out, but a lot of that is just the melted butter. Discard that, and get ready for slicing. So I'm looking at both sides here. We're going to end up seasoning on the inside probably, but at this point you kind of want to be cutting against the grain. So if you kind of pull the meat apart, you'll kind of see where the fibers are going, and you want to be cutting against that. Sorry for my bad filming here. I was more focused on the steak and not really paying attention to what I was doing with my videoing. But as you're cutting that steak across, you want them to be fairly nice and thin. You don't want thick chunks of steak. It'll end up being really tough. But with thin chunks of steak, it ends up being easy to cut, and it kind of melts in your mouth. So as I'm going through this, there'll be parts of the ribeye as well that have really, really thick parts of that fat. You can see on the left side there as I'm getting to the bottom. I'm going to end up taking that away later. But for now, I'm cutting through it all. Looks really nice. It's still blushing that pink. And again, I want it to be around that mid-rare side. So as I'm looking at a piece, looks pretty darn close. And there's going to be a lot of people on YouTube that are going to be trolls and say, oh my god, that's so undercooked, so overcooked. For me, this is the perfect 24-ounce steak.